Well, Muhammad Ali had great comebacks, I tell you what, but this was bigger than anything we've ever seen globally. Incredible. I mean, what they've thrown at that man over the course of 2 years is actually just is remarkable. And wouldn't we like to have some of that down here in Australia?
Generally speaking, the stock market is now 15%.
So it was an incredible outcome. And what I think the biggest read for me on that was the people that are hurting, the middle class, working class people, not so much the rich, which is the 0.05% of America, but the middle class working people that have found it, that haven't progressed in 20 years, let alone the last 4 years, and they came home and supported him. And so I think that's just remarkable. And it turns out that 17.5% didn't really, nor have voted for him in the past, but hanging on to him in relation to his policy and beliefs. I wish we had that down here in Australia. So it was great. It was really refreshing. I think I slept 4 hours last night, just couldn't turn the TV off, so it was incredible. Oh, look, it certainly does. I mean, you're talking to a person that actually, work is, I mean, I don't find work, it's a joy for me. I mean, and people say I'm a bit of a workaholic, but I just love creating things and I love being productive. This country's fallen behind in so many areas, and America's a can-do place, and it's just for me refreshing that he did get up. And what will happen? It puts a lot of pressure now on the Australian government and other countries for that matter to make a stand and put a stake in the ground and lead and turn these nations around. And America's not the only one in trouble. I mean, there's plenty of other nations, Europe, obviously Australia, and China's got its own issues. So I think that work ethic and let's get up and make it happen. Don't just sit there and expect governments to change your life. Well, Trump's come out in recent weeks and with tax changes, and I must say I was gobsmacked. The most incredible thing I've ever seen in politics in 30 years was moving corporate rate from 35 to 21. I thought, I just couldn't believe that when I saw it, when it had been passed. And I think that was incredible. And what you saw in 2017 and 2018 was the biggest, most productive period in global capitalism. 2017, 2018, if you go back and check the markets. And so I think that the markets now in relation to Bitcoin, he's made, well, there's been discussions around having heavily tax concessions on not just Bitcoin but cryptocurrency. How you manage that and putting concessions on regulated crypto is possible, and there was talk about putting capital gains tax concessions on crypto like akin to holding real estate or an asset more than 12 months in Australia. You get the 50% concession. There's no detail around that. There's just speculation. And now whether people hope that hasn't been passed, and it may not be, so I think that's way too early to predict. Global markets rallied last night. We see the Dow Jones running overall to 45,000 points. It's at the record high today. I think you'll see 45,000 points, another 2,500 to 3,000 points before Christmas. That's how much of an impact this will have on the global market, on the American markets. Now, that's not to say that the market's not overvalued, but in relation to, and that's not to say that people should go out there and rush out and buy Bitcoin, because having tax concessions doesn't necessarily mean that the asset's good. The big rush to Bitcoin is the strength or the weakness, more importantly, of the US dollar. And so that's the big hype at the moment with what they do with tax concessions on Bitcoin. Well, I think what you'll see is, China would be very concerned on the outcome of last night. Russia would certainly be concerned about what happened last night. So and being understanding production in business and understanding the motor vehicle industry fairly well, that it's not a case of America trying to compete with a Chinese vehicle just on pure mass and pure economics. And anyone claiming that they're going to compete with the Chinese market needs their head checked. That what will happen is that Detroit, Michigan, and those areas there is to bring back the American and give them a chance to compete. It doesn't necessarily mean what the outcome will be is that the Chinese car will always be competitive on price, because they have the cost to produce is a lot less because of the economies of scale. But the American market's being obliterated, and so in certain pockets of Europe too on cars, EVs really haven't taken off like people thought they would. Hybrids seem to be the way to go. And I think that what it will do is, threatening to put these tariffs on there, is it'll give some breathing space for the American market to come back up and find its position back in the global economy, notwithstanding that Chinese will always be competitive, but it'll give some oxygen back into the automotive industry in the United States. Now, long term, that's good. Short term, 2, 3, 5 years, it doesn't mean that overall. Toyota's been the biggest, most productive car manufacturer in the history of the world. And I don't know whether anyone will catch them. And the biggest production or biggest owner of vehicles being Toyota and Volkswagen. So I think what it will do is it'll just give them a chance to compete. And people will decide whether they buy an American vehicle or buy one that's from China that will probably be, 15 to 20% cheaper. I think that's what we'll see, pound for pound, if someone's going to buy an SUV or a family vehicle. And so it's all right to put tariffs and get all creative and inventive with it's about the consumer demand and doing a demand analysis on what people want, or more what they can afford at the same time. So I think it'll give an American market a lot more opportunity to compete. And it may not be as excessive, these tariffs, as of what's being claimed. So I think that was the main aim, at least. Not to, anyone who thinks the American market's going to compete with the Chinese on EV or cars itself, that won't happen. But it'll give a big boost to the American economy. As much as, in my world of business, he's certainly one of my gods, Warren Buffett. As I look up to a picture on my wall up there of him, that they've made mistakes in the past. A lot of these big institutions have actually had big positions, and then you'll write about it in 6 months how they regret they probably pulled the trigger too soon. The decision for Warren Buffett was not about, certainly getting out at the high price and cashing in on profits. The biggest threat to shareholders there, of course, is corporate tax moving from 21 to potentially 28 or worse, 35. And so are you better off to cut it and call it when you're uncertain about the outcome of the election? But now that the market's up 3% today, they'll make decisions now, I think, whether they get back in to those companies on smaller scale and ride that wave up again. And overall in the economy, and I've said before that the US economy and the Australian economy is overall overvalued, the overall index. But that's not to say that there's, in my opinion, 6 to 8 and companies that we're putting in our Hamilton Chase Global Fund, which is about to launch, that will be the beginning. And I never forget 2000 after the .com is that, people talk, Amazon got tarred with the same brush with the .com companies, And as it turns out, that was just the beginning of Amazon. And we've seen Amazon go from strength to strength. So I think you're going to see in this market now, while the index is overvalued, but there'll be potentially 8 to 12 superstars that will see that will double in value in the next 4 to 5 years. And the balance of the index will probably struggle to keep up with that. So with the drivers, and certainly the Magnificent Seven. I mean, you look at what Facebook's done of recent times, Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Berkshire Hathaway. What a wonderful position now to hold 322 billion US in cash. So you're going to see some real standouts like the Amazon in 2000. We're going to see, 7, 8, up to 12 companies that are going to shoot the lights out, where the balance of the companies, and you'll see a lot of companies, the middle markets probably fall away and not be able to compete with those kinds of returns. So it's not just all doom and gloom. It's about the black caviars, if you refer to it in horse racing, that those ones are going to, that I think they've got 50%, maybe 100% return over the next 3 to 4 years, because just no one will compete with them. They just don't have that much competition. There's so much of a dominance in the market. Both. It's going to be great. It will apply a lot of pressure to the Labor Party. Albanese will be under an immense amount of pressure now, given that this company hasn't really progressed at all under control of the Labor Party, and I think that it'll put a lot of pressure on people asking those questions. Well, look what Trump's done. He's listened to the people. You can't just be taxing. There's 14 different taxes that apply in corporations today, and where's our productivity? And it turns out, oh, by the way, did you get the memo? We've sold everything off. So what now? I think there's a lot of pressure on the Labor Party. I said to John Hewson many 2 years ago, it's a term that we don't, as a Liberal supporter, that it's a term we didn't want, particularly post-COVID, high inflation. But now, hopefully, the Liberal Party now will stand up. The smartest thing that the Liberal Party can do is really get in close with Donald Trump, take a few feathers out of his cap and try and adopt them and get them passed down here in Australia. That's the best thing that could happen. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the Labor Party right now. Well, I mean, bringing the productivity onto the US soil is well and truly good, and that can be done. And if that increases the cost of production, which invariably it will, and this is where it's all this high-level talk. If the assembly plants are in the United States, and call it Texas, a lot of the outer regions there, but some of the components are actually made in China, but the assembly of the actual final valuable product is on Australian soil, and it does cost. And I'm just if you use 100 cents, call it $1, and buy that, bring it on Australian soil. The video, a lot of these other companies turn around and say, well, now it's going to cost $1.22. And so where the pressures then and the political posturing goes on is that we're happy to do that, but we're going to need a 25% tax concession on capital gains tax and income tax. So you bring the jobs back, but the corporations get tax concessions on profits. So that's where the trade goes on. So then that's no different to what we've done before in cost in production of real estate. We've bought it locally and got concessions back for employing people here to assemble that. So that's what you've got. If they want to play that card, and then what happens in history, history has been that they've tried to do that, and then there's been pressure from the other side that the tax concessions are too high, and then they revert back to producing them back offshore. But for right now, bringing the job, if he follows through with that, he probably will, and he's probably likely to give those tax concessions back to the corporations. But he gets what he wants for jobs and gives them a tax break, and there's a a mutual understanding and an agreement struck between the parties. That typically what happens. It's no different to what people don't realise that Mercedes-Benz were heavily involved in Tesla in the design, chassis, frame, and America giving massive concessions when they were raising capital for Tesla. Why are we getting all these made from Germany? And so what happened there is that they loaded the taxation on that, loaded the cost to assemble those cars in the US, and then gave massive concessions, tax concessions. That's why a lot of Tesla did, and a lot of other companies, particularly Amazon. People say, how do you earn, how do you have revenue of $300 billion and pay $200,000 in income tax? So that's the next wonder. What people don't really understand that, and they, why is this company earning $300 billion and they own $200,000? Apple. I mean, Apple going back last financial year paid $147,000 in income tax in Australia. Now, people sort of find that hard to fathom, but now with international taxes, what I've pretty much been, which I've studied intensely, that's what you'll see: massive concessions back. For corporations. We'll come to Australia or America, we'll devise it, we'll run the power plants, we'll run all of the assembly there, production plants, but what we'll need is we'll employ 200,000 people, but we're going to need, we're going to need to bring the corporate rate of 21 down to 10, and so that's what you'll see. And will it work? It works for a while, and then what happens is the Federal Reserve realise they can't afford that because the IRS, the revenue is not sustainable, and then there's a part and parcel, half made here, half made back in China. But I think that's what we're seeing. And you'll have to follow through with that too, because what he did to Mexico shut them down. Now he has to follow through now because effectively he's made that promise to to GMH and all of the car manufacturers to assemble the cars on US soil. Look, I think I think you're likely to see in the next 3 to 4 months easing in the Middle East. I think you're going to see tensions between now and June ease in Russia, Ukraine. I think that the Chinese now are going to come to the table. I don't think he'll be chasing them. I think they're going to be wanting to talk to him now and have a different approach. I think that the good thing, I think we're starting to see, what it will do is probably bring this inflation problem, the dissipation earlier than expected. I think you'll see interest rates gradually come off, but they're not going to go back to where they were pre-COVID. But I suspect now with the pressures now, with productivity, you're going to see interest rates in the US probably come off by about 2% between now and June, at least. And as I said, for Europe are still struggling as well. China's this win for them is a massive threat. So I think Chinese, a lot of shift in the area of politics, trade, currency will be one to watch at the moment. Volatility in currency will be a real shift. Bonds, investments, and defensive assets now will probably be priced down, and equity prices now will. I think you're going to see the global markets rally. That's the high level takeaway, and I think overall I feel a lot better about America, Australia, Europe as a whole, and pulling China into line in relation to, I think, that dominant. The biggest reason why the importance is the biggest threat was losing the US dollar as the US as world currency. I think that was a great win because the weakening of that dollar The last thing we needed to be is to be for China to have world dominance, in 5 to 10 years. That's not going to happen now. So big changes in inflation, big changes in interest rates, volatility in currency before these things settle down to find out, well, where do we buy our goods now? Well, if we don't buy them from China, or if we do buy them from China, how much is that going to cost? Pressure on Australia, pressure on Europe to make changes because the people in America, the majority, have said we want change, we're not comfortable. Well, that's worldwide. So they're massive shifts now. I think that is a real wake-up call, as you said, for other world leaders. Out of 195 countries, I mean, there'd be 140 that would be, the leaders now would be very, very concerned and obligated now to make serious changes if they can.